the first thing we want to talk about is, why diversity and inclusion? Why is that important? And Naomi, I know you've done some research on sort of the science and everything behind that. Can you share with us some of those details?
Yeah, absolutely. First, thank you, Lightbend, for bringing us all together to have what I think is a really important discussion, and frankly honored to be the person talking about some of the why here. Just to give you a little bit of flavor about Trybe.ai and what we do and the perspective that I bring. As I mentioned, we're a leadership development tech company building leadership development tools. So our platform helps leaders build the so-called soft skills that they need to lead happy and productive teams. And so because of that, I've studied and measured and defined leadership skills a lot and the dynamics associated with team performance. And I can tell you from that work that the science is in, and the work of many others in the field, that if you're trying to solve complex tasks, inclusion and diversity is critical. And I think that's actually a kind of an intuitive thing to think about if you do. And that the idea is really, if you have cognitive diversity, solving a diverse problem, such as building a product for a broad population, you're going to be better off, generally speaking. And so this has been measured by our team, as well as famous studies at MIT and Google that you may have heard of, where the specific behavior of people participating equally in a team has the highest correlation with their success than any other signal that we measure. More importantly than that, and I think this is really cool, the Woolley and Pentland, two very famous scientists in the world of inclusion and diversity in team science, have found that by simply including people's ideas in conversations, it's a far more important factor in the success of teams than the maximum IQ of any one individual on that team. So the most effective leadership strategy that you can learn to deploy or use or leverage is to learn how to draw the collective intelligence of your team, to learn how to play a team game. And that's going to far outstrip any other strategy related to playing rock stars. Then you can look at this from the business angle, and McKinsey has done actually now a pretty famous study. They did the first one in 2015 and then the second one in 2018, and they found that companies who were in the top quartile for having cultural and ethnic diversity on their executive teams were a full 33% more likely to lead on profitability as well. And this wasn't just an upside, it was actually a measurable lag for those who were the laggards in the population as well. And yet, armed with this knowledge, because literally the companies who were in that study got studied again and they found the results, armed with this knowledge, the companies in that study only improved 2% in the 3 years between the two data points. And you have to ask yourself, why? Knowing that this is so critical and it's logical and it's intuitive and it's proven and there's so many reasons to say, like, you should do it. Well, why don't we do it? Because, and I think, humbly, it's a complex problem to solve. One of the things that I think, having looked at this a lot and looked at a lot of companies grappling with this, one of the most important things to really keep in mind when you're thinking about tackling the inclusion part of the equation, which I'm sure many of you are already looking at the diversity side. The diversity side tends to be much more common, and people haven't really gotten around, I think, mostly to having this conversation that we're having today. So what happens when you do that is you're essentially pouring water into a leaky bucket. And what's happening is that diverse population that you're hiring in, the attrition rates can be higher for them and the promotion levels lag. And that, again, is a measured thing. So when looking at this problem on the up note, not to just be a bearer of bad news, to tell you something positive, and I think this is a good thing, as many engineers in the audience are like this, if you kind of know the problem, you can solve it, right? So the problem is, by its very nature, it's multifaceted. And that is also intuitive, I think, and it's measurable. So what I mean by that is the participation dynamics, the success dynamics of different people are different. And one example of a really great startup in California, they're called TrustSphere. They do relationship network analysis, and they were looking at the differences between men and women. That was just the example of their population in what it takes to succeed. And what they found was that women needed to have higher ranks in their network to have a higher odds of promotion. So your better odds of success in promotion, the higher rank the closest person in your network had. This was not true for men. And it's just one example of the kind of differences and the multifaceted elements of the problem that we're looking at, and why it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. And I think one of the reasons why many companies haven't made as much progress as they could, because essentially they need to have a diverse group of people solving those complex problems and thinking about the best way to do it. So.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. That's awesome. And I think understanding why it's important is a critical aspect of this. One of the things I wanted to move on to from there, and thank you so much for that exploration of the topic, is I think one of the things that we run into in our experience, my experience, is that we don't have experiences being the underrepresented person in the room, and that's sort of one of these things where when you talk about inclusion and it being a leaky bucket and fixing that. We don't have so much the opportunity to understand what those people are going through. So we can go through maybe some of the motions, but we maybe don't have a deep empathy for it. And so for that, what I wanted to do, and Sushila and Tara have offered to share with us a little bit of their stories of operating in an environment where they're less represented. And I really appreciate that in terms of, I think the empathy that it can build. So Sushila, do you mind starting with that?
No, I don't mind, even though it's, I gotta admit, it's gonna take me some courage, perhaps some liquid courage, to share this story.
Yeah, this is the best panel ever.
All panels should come with wine.
Seriously.
But from my perspective, the empathy and the cognition, and also what we as individuals can do on a daily basis as we're building teams, as we're interacting with our colleagues, that's the difference between the 2% change and the change on a broader scale. And yeah, it's hard to build empathy if you just don't have awareness of what it's like for underrepresented groups. And so I'm reminded of a story that was fairly early in my tech career, and I've been in technology for over 25 years. And it was at a point where I felt like I was making some real strides in my career. And I kind of felt like I was doing really well, and I was on a bit of a fast track. And I was the right hand to the COO of a really a darling of Silicon Valley tech company. And so I was his proxy in a lot of different meetings, on a lot of different initiatives, and like I was feeling really good about myself and feeling pretty successful. And I went to the UK for 4 weeks to work with one of the new SVPs there. And I was helping him build his processes as he was taking over this really high growth region for us that was doing really well. And he was a really senior guy. And we worked together for this month and did a lot of great things. It was highly productive. And so I'm getting ready to leave, and he takes me out for lunch, and he says, everyone thinks you're sleeping with the COO, but you're actually really good at your job. Yeah. And so obviously my first reaction was the horrification. I was horrified. And my next reaction that was really strong, that I actually still feel today, which I think is representative of a lot of women's reactions to these types of things, but it's kind of shame. And you're just hanging your head down in shame, like, oh my God, why would you think this about me? What is it about me? Et cetera, et cetera. And I thought about that a lot, and I asked him, like, why would you think that? And he says, well, you're a woman with a lot of power in this organization. Okay, that's about the worst reason I can think of, but it really opened my eyes to the challenge. And I think I was lucky because, I did actually consider, like, okay, this is not for me. I'm not going to be able to have success in the tech world as a woman. Like, maybe I retreat and go do something different. But that's not me. So it actually really inspired me to try to move up the ranks. And I think it fueled my ambition as a woman so I could have more of a positive impact by bringing some of my more feminine qualities to the workplace. And so I really changed what I was doing in my career, which was like trying to fit in with the guys, because clearly that wasn't helping me. And I just brought compassion, kindness, empathy to the workplace. And so, as horrifying as that experience was, I think in the long term, it's actually something that's really helped me as a leader. And I share that because I think it's the people in this room who have the types of influence and power to keep those types of assumptions and biases and judgments out of the workplace, and to really think about people and the merits they bring and the value they bring in their own special and unique ways. And one of the significant reasons I think this is an important story is because of the statistic you mentioned, or the finding you mentioned, Naomi, that women need male allies in the workplace. And that means we have to check our assumptions and check our biases. And that is hard. That is so hard. And that is something that we all have to be really cognizant about. And that's what I wanted to share about that.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I know that was difficult to share.
Wine.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. Thank you, Sushila.
Thank you.
Tara, do you mind sharing with us?
So HR organizations love me because I can check a lot of boxes. I'm female, I'm half Mexican, and I'm a member of the LGBTQ community. So I'm great for quotas.
The trifecta.
Right. And as a young engineer, I was pretty twitchy about all of those things. I had very low self-confidence. And eventually I got over that. I felt extremely fortunate, and I always had a lot of allies and mentors, male and female, that really helped me along. But that experience in my early days, in my wee days, made me very sensitive as I moved into management for people who might also be struggling. And this story has to do with a young man I hired a couple companies ago. Fabulous young man, came on strong recommendation from those backdoor recommendations that LinkedIn is so good for. A little younger, came in a little bit green, and was the first and only African American in the entire engineering organization, at admittedly a small company, but he was it. So very mindful of his experience, talked a lot, invited him to share how he was feeling, whether or not he was comfortable, and really trying to make sure that he felt supported in the midst of this very well-established, very senior, and frankly, very white team that he was on. And he taught me a lot. I was introduced to Kendrick Lamar, and I got a little bit woke, just a little. We talked about Webb Du Bois and Ellison, and I was a big literature nerd, and we'd go out to lunch, we'd have a great time, and he would say things very politely. I don't know how many of you have ever said this in a context of work, but you're like, oh God, that was the most ghetto solution ever. You don't even think about it, right? Well, you do if there's a black guy on your team and he says, hey, could we use something else? And we're all like, oh my God. Yes, of course, so janky. That was a janky implementation. Little things like that. And I want to say, I'm very proud that my team really stepped up and went out of their way to try and make sure that we had that mindfulness. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter how careful and mindful you can be if that person still continues to feel the isolation of being the only one. And he ended up leaving the company with my grudging blessing. I, of course, did not want to try and force him to stay where he felt uncomfortable. And he found another really great job at a little company across the bay where he was not the only one and didn't feel that sense of isolation. And I feel like as a manager, I learned a lot from that process, and it's really instructed a lot of the views I have as far as recruitment, hiring, and retention. Mm-hmm. Retention being the trick, right? People complain about pipeline. It's garbage, but people complain about it. And I say, I can prove to you a million different ways that pipeline is not the problem. Retention is the thing that causes the issue. And it's true if you're a white male introvert, right? It's true if you're whatever color you can think of, whatever background you can think of. If you're the only one, you're gonna struggle. And as a management team, we have to think about how do we engage different types of population in order that everyone feels that ability to succeed.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you for that. And Tara, you've also done a lot of work around improving the recruitment process in general, right? And the interview process. So could you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Oh God, I could go on for a long time about that.
You've got
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Maybe 3.
All right, well, let me ask a quick question to the audience. Raise your hands if you've heard of the GitHub repository that lists all of the companies that do not do whiteboard interviews. There is a GitHub repository where mostly women list companies that do not do whiteboard interviews. Whiteboard interviewing is actually a terribly uninclusive process, if that's all you do, right? So the interview process, being thoughtful about how people not only learn, how they communicate, how they problem solve, there has to be variety. Sourcing. Yeah, we have the saying is, in the Bay Area, nobody ever got fired for recruiting at Berkeley and Stanford. Well, you can't imagine a more homogenous group of students than the students at Berkeley and Stanford, and they're very good schools. But, they are a homogenous student body, and the other thing is everybody is recruiting at Berkeley and Stanford, and so it's not necessarily a great way to find good candidates. Google in particular has this great program that explicitly reaches out to the HBCU schools, the historically black college and universities in the United States. There's also the Hispanically significant institutions, I think is the other way of describing it. Cal State East Bay, San Jose State, San Francisco State. They are not glamorous, but they have great programs. And so it's changing the way you source. It's changing the way that you interview. I'm a huge fan of behavioral interviewing. It's not especially for someone who's not straight out of school, I am not gonna ask an algorithms question out of the 101 book. I don't remember that stuff, right? Why am I gonna expect you? If you haven't been using it, it means you haven't needed it, right? So I'm gonna be looking at that resume and picking out a problem and then putting you on the spot for it. How did you solve it? What would you have done differently? Why, right? What were the things that didn't turn out? Why was that? And really engaging, make it an active communication back and forth, because you're selling yourself as much as they're selling themselves to you. Right, and this whole I actually knew someone that many companies ago. It was a point of honor to this guy that no one ever passed his technical questions. And I'm like, why do you do that? He goes, well, I learn more when they fail. How do they fail? I'm like, what are they learning?
Yeah.
That you're a jerk. I mean, I personally, did an interview where I bombed the interview, which turned out to be a blessing in surprise because I got a better job later. But the guy comes in and he sits down. He goes, "I spent over a month figuring this problem out, so I'm going to see what you think." I'm like,
I think I'll see you later.
Thanks. I mean, I was so flustered. I mean, I'd been I'm going to date myself if you can't tell from the gray hair, but I was a Perl hacker at the time. God bless Larry Wall. And now I'm all about Guido, sorry. And the guy asked me this question that has me so flustered, I can't even remember how to open a file. I mean, that's how badly my brain blitzed, right? Because he was coming in to see how I failed, right? And that is not, in fact, that is probably the worst possible way that you could engage someone who is a member of the traditionally underrepresented set, right? This is a group that already is feeling a little nervous, and you've just made it 1,000 times worse. And it's your loss, right? I like to think it was that company's loss.
It was.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
But it's having that open-mindedness. And then here's the final thing. I know I'm probably at the end of time, which is we talk about cultural fit. This is a very dangerous term, cultural fit. Would I want to go out to beer with this someone? Well, what if the person you're interviewing is Muslim or Mormon? They're not going to go drinking beer with you. What if this person has kids? They need to go home and pick it up. What does that have to do with their ability to deliver, right? And so while it is very comforting and frankly very common that we want to be able to socially feel comfortable with the people that we hire, it's actually a bad idea because we're just completely restricting the type of people we're going to hire. When we talk about brogramming, which is
Right up there with chick tech.
right? There's a reason programming, it's worse than chick tech. But programming happens because like we're gonna go out and we're gonna party after work, or we're gonna work all night and we're gonna be drinking beer while we do it, and imagine how good that code is. But it also, to Naomi's point, you are now excluding a different point of view.
Yeah.
You are excluding someone who could challenge your views, and to challenge and to be challenged is uncomfortable, but the end result is going to be that much better. You know, so these are the types of things. And like I said, I could go on for a long time. I actually gave a talk about this. If you want to go wander around YouTube, there's a lot of great research about behavioral interviewing and other types. So you know, go out and find the thing that's going to help you out. But you really have to be thoughtful about it. And then one last quick thing is, as the hiring manager, you absolutely have to prep your team so people know what they're doing, because you want to cover the broad spectrum of what it is that you're hiring for, and to train the people who are helping you identify those candidates. What are the priorities? What are the critical things to look for? It's not whether or not they like the same brand of beer.
Awesome. Thank you, Karen. Awesome. So we talked a lot about recruiting and why diversity is important. You know, Naomi mentioned, you know, the leaky bucket, and I just keep coming back to that idea of like, you know, once we get somebody in, you know, diversity is great, inclusion is more important. And Mona, at Morgan Stanley, I think you've said, you know, everybody's got a seat at the table, and I think you guys have done an excellent job at building that sort of inclusive culture. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I was blessed, honestly, being at Morgan. I mean, I've been there 20 years. And if you walk around the firm and ask people how long they've been there, you'll hear similar number of years. And if you ask them, why is that? Almost everybody would say it's the culture. So one of the things that is ingrained in us is our core values. I mean, we have 4 core values, but one of them, it says doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. And we believe diversity and being inclusive is doing the right thing. At the same time, I mean, we do acknowledge that, okay, the numbers might not be where they should be. And in regards to retention, about a few years back, we established the WIT community. So it's a place where women can feel they have a forum, they can network, they have other women that they're champions. So one of the things we started, something very, very small, is at the beginning doing tech talks. It's just to showcase our women and their experience and their expertise. Another thing we've done, we had a few different programs internally. One is called Driven, where we took mid-level, like VPs that's showing a lot of promise, and we put them in sort of a management type of program, because everybody knows when you promote somebody, it's because of they delivered a project or they were great technically, but they might not have the necessary skills to become a good manager. Mm-hmm. And we want to see them progressing later in the years in their career. So we're invested in them. Another program we did this year, we just piloted, and it has a great success. It's something called Reach. Honestly, in myself, I feel like women were mentored enough, and I think we have too many mentors. It's about time to have sponsors. And part of this program is to place diverse male and female with somebody who is senior enough, not just one level up, but several levels up, that act as their champion and act on their behalf to talk to their manager or to go and kind of basically build their case for promotion or for anything. And it's being great that we're going to roll it out to other regions. And I mean, we're doing a lot of different things, like just partnering with other external institutions like Anita Borg. I'm very proud of what we did this year at the Grace Hopper. We sent about 40 plus women this year, and we're planning on expanding it. And it's creating this sense that we're investing in our women. We're trying to inspire them by seeing other women that are succeeding in their career. So all of this is helping, honestly, just the retention and the whole case in general.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. Awesome. That's awesome. Thank you for teaching us about that. Thank you. So we have about 15 minutes left. Sorry, 13 minutes left. And not to put too fine a point on it. What I'd like to do, if we could, is I'd like to ask each of our panelists to give us some tips on just what we can do to further diversity and inclusion within our environments. And then if we have some time left over, we'll go to questions. If you want, well, I'll introduce questions when we get there. So Naomi, you have an awesome tagline for this. So can I ask you to go first?
Sure, yeah, happy to. So the tagline I like to use is, commit daily acts of inclusion in your workplace. And the reason why I use that is that I really, when you're tackling a really big problem, I love to break it down into its smallest parts. I also think that, it's really what you do every day that amounts to the most success here. And, from the stories you're just hearing, it's really those things that happen every day at the seat at the table, just that phrase. It's literally talking about when you're in your meetings, what are you doing to be inclusive? And I studied this a lot because I told you I was doing all this MIT work and whatever, and looking at how teams behave in meetings. And how many of you spend most of your day where there's only 2 or 3 people talking in the discussion that you're in? Are you one of them? Are you aware of the people in your room who are generally quiet? When was the last time you championed an idea of somebody who's typically silent in a conversation that you have? When was the last time you solicited their idea? When was the last time that you acknowledged it or validated it in that room? I guarantee you that if you tell somebody, hey, I'm really interested in what you have to say because you're a woman or you're half Mexican, that's actually going to be really a negative experience. But if you tell them... I'm sure it's happened. I know it's happened. I'm sure it's happened to all of us at some time. It's a version of what happened to Sushila. But if you tell them, hey, I am interested in what you have to say, that is one of the most ultimately inclusive things you can do. And I'll add on that, I think one of the most important things to recognize when you enter into the whole question of inclusion and diversity is to notice that, or just to admit that, we all have unconscious bias. Every single person does. And so when you're sitting in that room, you're likely to be expressing that. And so when you're thinking about including people's ideas, you do have to go that extra mile to listen to it. It isn't as easy as programming or whatever that's called. It is easier to hang out with the people that you know the best and who speak your language. It's harder to speak to somebody who doesn't speak English as a first language. It's harder to speak to somebody who is, really, really detailed oriented and somebody who's really, really abstract. But the value of what you can do if you get together, it's exciting. And so I think ultimately, whether or not you do it because of business or you do it because it's the right thing to do or you do it whatever, it's more fun to work with people and get to know them. And so I hope that at a minimum, just thinking about it on a personal level and making it something daily that you do, it's actually one of the most profound things that you can have an impact on if you make a commitment to that.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. It's great. Mona, do you have any tips we can share?
So one of the things I've noticed, I manage large teams, and some people are very quiet. So yes, there is some person that dominates the whole conversation. So one of the things I try to do at the end of the meeting, I make sure that I look people in the eye. Do you have something to add? Just in case, if they felt this shyness or they don't want to speak up or something, I give them a chance. Yeah. this is like your chance to speak up, to say something, to talk about your ideas, to be more inclusive. And I mean, just being cognizant also of people's lives, like you manage teams, and you know, somebody need to leave early to pick up a kid, or somebody need to take like a parent who's sick to somewhere. Make sure that when you schedule a meeting, you don't do it late in the day. I mean, small things like this really, really help. Whether you don't think about it, but it does make a difference.
Absolutely.
My turn?
Please.
Well, and I feel like we're alluding to really having that empathy and that human connection with our coworkers. And man, there's all these articles about like be human at work, and it's like, well, what the hell else are you going to be? Like, what? I mean, it's so bizarre that that's got to be a thing. But you know, it's interesting because. One of the things I've noticed working with a lot of engineers in particular is there's not a lot of patience for small talk. And I hear this all the time, like, oh, I can't stand the small talk. But you know, if you're really gonna have some big talk with people, because we all have a story, we've all had experiences. I mean, we're talking about amplifying, or we're trying to amplify the voices of the underrepresented, but you know, you're hard pressed to find someone who hasn't had you know, a situation where they felt uncomfortable or just not included, or you know, felt like they could totally be themselves. I mean, those are not uncommon things. And so it's amazing to me how small talk can actually really help bring down some barriers. And you got to start somewhere. And so, yeah, starting at the, hey, tell me what you think because you're half Mexican or you're the brown girl in the room. You know, let's work up to that with getting to know me and understand the value and the perspective I bring. And you got to do that with some small talk. So show it some respect.
Right on. Tara.
Okay, the half Mexican's turn. So I've been in management most of my career, so a lot of how I think about this is from a management or leadership perspective, and it's modeling the values that you want to see in your organization. And the number one rule is we are all individuals, and that sounds kind of trite, but it's super important. There's too many companies that I can think of, and probably many of you are familiar or even work at them now, where you know the individuals within a team are considered, you know, mutually tradable. You can swap people in and out, no problem. Sometimes that's true. From the, you know, if somebody gets hit by a bus, yes, it would be very good if someone else knows how to do that. But by assuming that everyone is more or less the same, that is sort of the basis of all disclusion, right? We all bring our particular values and experiences and knowledge and creativity to the roles that we have. And with that, you know, that, to Naomi's point, that is a daily practice. And so figuring out with that group of individuals that you have in your organization, how are you as the manager going to bring out the best of all of them? Because it's on you as the manager to honor the individuals. It's not the individuals to adapt themselves to your singular management style, right? And as long as you keep that in mind and keep a feeling of adaptability in how you provide that leadership and how you encourage the other leaders on your team to step up, eventually you'll start to make those strides. Ongoing education is critical. Even bringing in trainers or sending folks to offsite training. Another thing I'm a big fan of is making more senior members have some sort of responsibility of mentorship. Not just for underrepresented, but for any reason. We're all a team, no rock stars, no heroes. That way lies madness, darkness, mayhem.
Or all rock stars, all heroes.
Well, that's okay. What's that line from The Incredibles? Everyone is special.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for those tips, and I, you know, personally, like learning about this is incredibly valuable. So thank you so much. And the daily acts of inclusion, as well as, you know, fundamentally treating everybody as the individual that they are, is a fantastic lesson if that's what we take from this session. We have 5 minutes left. It feels dangerous to ask for just one question. What do you guys think? Should we get just one question? I think that's all we've got time for.
You keep giving me drinks.
I got a good one. I'm going to jump up and take this chance, Mike.
Okay,
Thank you.
go ahead, John.
So I have 3 daughters, so I appreciate all of you being pioneers in our industry. You are. This room's definitely not 50-50 male-female. If you were to look back on your career, what advice would you give yourself now?
That's a great question. Does anybody want to start? Naomi, do you want to start?
I'm happy to start. I think this is, it's like the idea of when you go traveling, like you prepare for it. I think just recognize that there's things that you want to do to prepare yourself for if you're not the incumbent. And just like you'd expect somebody who is studying in school and their native language is, I don't know, Mandarin, you'd expect them to put in that extra effort, and you know that they're investing a lot more to be heard, to be understood, to participate. And I think that just recognizing it's going to take that energy and preparing them for that. So validating that it's happening, validating that the data is real, and the effort that they have to put in is real too. That I think for me would have saved a shit ton of time and pain and suffering that I had when I was like, wait, is it only me? Like, no, it's not only me. It is part of the dynamics of the environment, and so it's helpful to know.
I would say, sorry, jump
Go ahead.
in.
No, go ahead.
I have 2 daughters, so I would say, don't let anyone take your power, whoever it is. Don't let other people make you doubt yourself. You're going to doubt yourself without any help whatsoever. So. Don't let anybody else add to that. And that's something that took me a long time. Well, I actually probably still need to work on it. It's a process.
Well, and I say along with that, find your people. Go find the jobs that bring out the best in you, that have people who bring out the best of you, best in you, and you bring out the best in them. And to me, pretending work is not somewhat of a family is just kind of a tough thing to do. We spend so much of our time with these people. They influence us. They influence how we feel about ourselves. They influence the decisions we make long term. We influence them. It's amazing how much how you interact with someone can change their day, can change their life, can change their choices. And you have to be really cognizant of that. But you can find the place where you can shine. And if that means making changes and that type of thing, you got to just feel comfortable doing it. Never stay in a situation where you don't feel like you can be your best self.
Exactly. And pick something you love, because you spend so much time at work, you might as well like what you do. I mean, I still come in the morning and I'm very excited about the day. If I don't like what I do, I would have went somewhere else. So people should pick something they really like.
Awesome. Well, that's the time we have, everybody. And I want to just thank our panelists so much.